Well, good evening. It's very thrilling indeed to come here again to see so many friendly faces that we know so well. It really is a pleasure. But brethren and sisters, we come at a time which is very significant indeed, as we've said before. We live at a time when things are really moving, and I'm sure every one of you knows that. But let's have a look at some of the things that have been happening more recently on the world scene. But let's come back, first of all, to that quote that we've got before us. Look what it says to us, brethren and sisters. It says to us, we know the times and seasons. I don't have to write and tell you that. Yourselves know it perfectly, that the day the Lord comes at a time when most people don't think, when they're not prepared, when they're saying peace and safety. Now remember that, because we're going to see that tonight. Then sudden destruction cometh on them as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. So let's look particularly at those first few verses for a moment. What we want to look at is the words times and seasons. What we want to look at first of all is the time. The word time is the Hebrew word or Greek word chronos, from which we get chronology. It's the duration, the length of the period. And so indeed, let's remind ourselves what we looked at last year. Times and seasons reconsidered, said Islip Collier way back in the Second World War. Russia and Germany had joined together, Rosh, Meshach and Tubal and Magog. And he said, they thought, was this going to be the return of the Lord Jesus Christ? And they wrote to Brother Islip Collier in the Christadelphian and asked him, and he said, no, it won't be. But he said, I'll tell you what, it's unwise for us to take too much from dates, but there's so many dates in Scripture that it's important that we understand it. It's still worse an error, says he, to be indifferent. So the question is, how long? And the date that he gave when the next consequential event would take place, and he didn't say what it was, because it could be Christ's return, but it doesn't fit. It means that because Christ comes at a time when you think not, at a time you don't know. So what is it? We don't know, but it's consequential. He said the next date of consequence is this year. Now, how did he get that? Well, he got it from Daniel chapter 7. You could turn it up if you wanted to, but it's all there. We know it very well. Daniel 7 parallels Daniel 2, doesn't it? But there is one or two things that are added, and here's one of them. The 10 horns, like the 10 toes. Here's the European area. Will be divided up into 10. And that took place when the Huns, the Vandals, the Visigoths, the Burgundians, the Barbarians moved in and carved up Europe into the 10, didn't it? Then he said, Daniel said, there shall rise another king. Whoops, I've gone and done the wrong thing. Let me get used to this. Another shall arise, which will subdue 3 kings, 3 of those horns, 3 of those kings, and it will give it to one who speaks great words against the Most High. Now he said that will last for a time, times and a dividing of times. Well, when did that happen? Well, barbarians came into Europe around about 395 AD, carved it into its 10. But then subsequently, 3 of those horns were plucked up. The ones that were in the Italian peninsula, the Vandals, the Lombards and the Huns. So here they are, part of that beast with the 10 horns. They were plucked up by this man, Pepin the Short, the father of Charlemagne. And what he did was, he gave it to the papacy. He actually, I think, decided that he wanted to go to heaven when he died or something like that. Thought that if he gave them a present, then that would be possible. So he gave it to them in 754, but it didn't last. He had to come back the next year, 755, 756, and he completed the job and gave it to the various popes, but the pope at that time. And they believed that the 3 might parts, or the 3 ridges on the crowns of the pope, represents those 3 papal states that were given. And so when did it happen? Well, dominantly they got control of those papal states 755. At 1260, when do you get? You get this year. So 755 754 to 756, Pepin the Short gave what was called Pepin's donation to the papacy. So what's going to happen? We don't know. Here's a suggestion. Look, brethren and sisters, add that period to there, we come to there. We're in a significant area. We should have seen something moving this year, this last year, and it did. Russia began to move, didn't it? So it looks like it's right. So what should we expect? Well, it was given to that papal horn. A horn is a political power that rules territories or powers. Does the Pope do that now? Look at this. He still rules. There he is. These people here are all Jesuits. They are priests which do not have the Jesuit or the priestly garments normally. Here is the leader of the EU. This man runs the bank of the EU. This man's been replaced by this man, Mr. Juncker, who runs the Club of Europe, all the countries of Europe. And here's the Prime Minister of Spain. And previously was a lady, Baron Ashton. She stood down, a British person, and the Catholics now taken over. There she is, Federica, whatever. But there is the people that run Europe today. They are subject to the papacy. But the suggestion is that that could come to an end next year, or this year, who knows? We'll see. But now let's come to the next point. What makes this so interesting is, yes, the date seems to work. And there are many other dates. Next year is exactly a jubilee from the Six-Day War. There was a jubilee from the formation, the Balfour Declaration, to the State of Israel, from the State of Israel to the Six-Day War. All of it seems to fit together, doesn't it? And here we are, a jubilee from the Six-Day War next year. What's it going to bring? But now let's look at this word here, seasons. Seasons, that word there speaks of the characteristic of a period. So if it's winter, it's cold. That's the characteristic of it, isn't it? What are we to look for? Signs of the season we're in. Signs of Christ's return. So that's what we're going to look at now. Because the two work together, I do think that we are at a point where it is very, very critical period. Very critical indeed. But let's go back a little bit, and we're going to work predominantly just from key ideas from Ezekiel 38. For those who don't know it quite so well, Ezekiel 38 speaks of the Jews in the land in the latter days. Clearly our time. Clearly now. But it goes on to say in that middle verse, notice, that there will come a power out of the north, from the uttermost parts of the north, a mighty army. So here's an invasion of the Middle East when the Jews are there. Who's this power from the north? Well, it's clearly Russia. Go from where Ezekiel lived, or wherever that prophecy possibly began, and you go due north from Israel, and you go through Russia. Go any further north, you get to the North Pole, and then it's all south. It's got to be Russia. Got to be Russia. The uttermost parts of the north. And of course we know in the very first verse of Ezekiel 38, it speaks of the prince of Rosh, Meshach and Tubal. Who's that power? Take Rosh alone and go to the lexicon, the leading lexicon of the Hebrew Bible, Gesenius, and he's talking about Ezekiel 38 and 39 where the term's used. And what does he say? Undoubtedly the Russians. Undoubtedly the Russians. So what have we got to see? We've got to see Russia take control of Europe. Russia today in those territories take Ukraine, Magog, Central Europe and Western Europe. It's got to take control of that area. Do we see that on the way now? Certainly Russia has begun to move, hasn't it? It began to move last year in no uncertain terms. What did Brother Thomas say to us? He said, when Russia makes its grand move out of our title, he said, for us, let us, the reader, then know that the end of all things is at hand. The long expected but stealthy advent of Christ, the King of Israel, will be on the eve of becoming a fact. It's thrilling, it's exciting. The time is short. Now you've all seen this before, but here's the picture of Europe. And what we expect, don't we, is the future movements of Russia are notable signs of the times, said Dr. Thomas, back there in 1848. So we're expecting Russia to control Turkey, move in, Ukraine, move in to control Eastern Europe, which is what we're going to dominantly look at tonight. Then move into Turkey and south to Israel. More on that will be dealt with in the next talk. But now, Russia's movements. Let's look over the last 100 years, from 1917 to now. We'll do that very briefly. But here it was. From World War I to World War II, in the latter part of World War II, she began to move. She moved in and took up this area which became the Warsaw Pact countries and set up the Iron Curtain so people couldn't go in or out. But then the Bible said, I'll turn thee back. I'll turn thee back. Is that what happened? Is that what happened? Of course it is. 1989, 1991, over those years, Russia became utterly bankrupt because of the low price of oil. And she was forced to retreat, and so there she is today. There she is what she was after 1991 when the Iron Curtain came down. And you know, we've just celebrated that, well, the world has, 25 years from November 1989 when the Iron Curtain came down in Berlin, or the wall was breached. There it is. And the troops moved back out because they couldn't afford to keep them there. They were too bankrupt. And they moved back out. But what the scripture says then, I'll put hooks in thy jaws, something's going to entice her forward, and I'll bring thee forth. And so there we are. And Russia has been moving. Crimea, March the 25th. Then into Ukraine. She's been on the way. And in that interim period, what has she been doing? Leading from 1991 through to now, hibernating. Hibernating. But she's not hibernating anymore. She's on the move. She's moving to control Ukraine. And she is certainly doing so in a brutal fashion. Brutal to say the least. Here she's moving. Whoops, I don't know why that did that. There we are, better. Here she's moving against Ukraine. And here's Mr. Obama. The world sees Mr. Obama as just mildly clipping his nails. Achieving little. That's how we see it too. She doesn't see... America, where is she? Hardly doing anything about it. Again, look at this. Here's how the world sees it. Mr. Putin. And here's the sanctions from the US and EU. Not doing much. Not doing much. Ridiculous. We've got our weapons like heck. And so Russia has been moving. She moved first of all into Georgia, 2008, parts of Georgia, took control of that. Then she moved in to destabilise Moldavia, or the area of Transnistria. Then she moved into Crimea, March last year. And then September, more particularly, she moved in on eastern Ukraine, and it's much bigger than that she controls now. But where is things going now? This is what we want to look at. Her army is attacking Ukraine, yes. She's exercising her troops on Europe's borders. She's threatening a nuclear response. She's stating she could and will take East Europe. And she has invaded Europe's waters and airspace. She's moving in an intimidating and terrifying manner against Eastern Europe. That's just what we would expect, wouldn't it? That she's going to control these areas. Daniel 2 tells us that. Ezekiel 38 confirms that. And she's got to control certainly Eastern Europe, and be aligned or occupy Western Europe. So the image stands, East and West is established. And Russia has been moving this year, moving in a grand fashion into Ukraine. Oh, she says, we're not really doing that. We're sending aid, humanitarian aid. Huge convoy of 260 trucks came to the border. Somebody got on board those trucks, found nothing much in them. Then overnight they shifted at another spot in the border. Next morning the next spot. And next morning they were in Ukraine. And when they were seen going in, they certainly weren't as lightly loaded as this. They were heavily loaded. Somewhere along the line they loaded something aboard it. Probably soldiers, probably equipment. And now, as we'll see a little later on, 11 convoys have gone in. 11 convoys have gone in. And tanks are moving in no uncertain terms, into Eastern Europe. So, things pause for a minute. Mr. Putin came to the G8 meeting, or G10 or whatever it is, over in Brisbane. But afterwards, as soon as he came home, Eastern Ukraine on the verge of full-scale conflict again. 32 tanks, 16 guns, and more equipment moved in. And everybody said, back off. Back off. Just calm it down. This is a situation leading to war. And what was his response? Don't mess with us. We have nuclear equipment. We are nuclear armed. He raised the sceptre of nuclear war with the West. Don't mess with us. In which the TV in Russia came out with broadcasts saying to America, back off or we'll turn you to nuclear dust. So very threatening words came through. And now, come to the last few months, November. International business paper here in Australia. Vladimir plotting to invade Europe. What we would expect. Putin has a concrete plan to invade Europe. And how far does he want to go? In Europe, Putin's plans of having a sphere of influence across the continent all the way to Portugal. Daniel's image. It's coming together, brethren and sisters. The threat is there. He says, just to terrify people, I can get into 5 countries in 2 days. Here's the capitals I can get to. I can have my troops in your capital. Adelaide, Sydney, Melbourne. Of course, not here, but we know. Imagine if we were worried by that. Imagine the impact it would have upon our minds and thoughts. And that's what he was saying. Here we can see, September last year. If I wanted, Russian troops could be in Kyiv, Warsaw, Bucharest, just in 2 days. Amazing. Terrifying. So what's the response of the West? What have they said? This is what they said. We'll cut you out of the banking network. We'll cut you out of the banking network. Apparently, in Belgium, there is a centre where computers are run, where many of the European transactions in banking between banks, not our bank cards or anything like that, but the big bank transactions are run from this centre here. Presumably it's backed up somewhere else, but be that as it may, the Western powers and Europe have been saying to Russia, back off or we'll stop your using of that money, the banking network. And Medvedev, the Prime Minister, had a response. Russian Prime Minister. What did he say? If there is no SWIFT, that's the name of this banking network, if there's no SWIFT, there is no banking. It means that the country's on the verge of war. Do that to us and it's war. Or they are definitely in a Cold War. I want you to note that our reaction will be without limits. Without limits. And so she has been moving. Now let's come back to Ukraine for a moment. The area they're now attacking is that part where I'll put the couple of arrows on there. Look at the date. Here's Stratfor. And what does it say? Red alert update at the heart of Mariupol crisis. They are saying they're expecting war big time in the area of Ukraine. All the indicators are that way. And we know Stratfor is a professional reporting paper for people who want to pay for it throughout the world. And they are saying, yes, Mariupol. Stratfor is continuing our red alert, prepared to launch an offensive to secure its hold on the Crimean Peninsula. Ukraine is not in a position to go on the offensive. They can't do much about it. They're calling up troops frantically in Ukraine, or people, men, who aren't even trained as soldiers, calling them up frantically to try and increase the army because they're in a terrible state. Red alert in Ukraine. But it doesn't stop there. Look, here's the global research. War on a global scale is the threat. We're looking at World War II appears inevitable. It's difficult not to see a war on a global scale fast approaching. All the signs are here. This is not my words, brethren and sisters. These are the papers. And these are consequential papers that are reporting this. All right? Here we can see another man giving a comment on it. Go and ask the Russians. Mikhail Gorbachev came over to the West and he said, he warns of Russian nuclear war over Ukraine a few days ago. Okay, Ukraine crisis could transform into World War III, he said. And he said, we're likely, if we can't accomplish our purpose, to launch a nuclear war. That's the way of Putin, he said. Be careful. Already, he said, 4,000 had died in Ukraine, 9,000 have been wounded. Back off. In other words, let us take over. And they're attempting to get that message across to everybody in Europe. Look at this. This happened only a few days ago. Towards Heathrow Airport came this, along with another one, without its transponders on to tell other aircraft that was in the zone. Came in and they had to delay, divert planes all over the place, so at Heathrow they couldn't land. What was it? It was a Russian bomber. And here's another fighter, I think that was a British one, went up to try and force it out of the airspace. RAF warplanes scrambled to intercept Russian bombers. More than 100 Russian aircraft were intercepted last year, and I believe that's Britain. 3 times more than during the whole of 2013. So once every 3 days at least, Russian bombers heading towards Britain. But it's not only that number, look at this. 400 scrambled in Europe. Finland feeling vulnerable amid Russian provocations. The bear is provoking Finland repeatedly, guiding military planes into Finnish airspace. But that number is not just Finland, that's the European area. And it's not only planes, it's ships. A pattern of aggressive Russian behaviour that has radiated across Europe. Look at what we're seeing. Now, brothers and sisters, this is what we've expected from long ago. And indeed, it's not only planes, ships. Russian Navy ships conduct drill in the English Channel. So they sailed out of here and came down the English Channel with their guns. Here they are. Russian Northern Fleet enters the English Channel to hold naval exercises off the coast of Britain. Why not hold it out here? Because you don't intimidate Britain. Trying to bring home to them, back off, we can take control of you. And indeed, Eastern Europe is terrified. Look at this. Here's the figures. The most recent figures, Eastern European armies outnumbered. There's the value, the number of troops these countries have got. And I might add, as I said to you, some countries are even calling them up now, people who are only partially trained. Poland is calling home people from Britain who've gone over to Britain for work, young people, and they're Polish. They've been trained, had a couple of months training in the army, they're calling them home. They're worried. 7,000 extra were called up by Poland in the last few days. Put it together, they've got half as number of troops pretty well, roughly, as Russia. About a quarter of the number of tanks, combined that is. About a quarter of the number of aircraft, combined. Didn't used to be like that, but they thought they had peace. And they've been deceived. Isn't that what we've expected? By peace, he should deceive many. And it's not stopping there. Poles are calling up extras, so's the Russians. So's the Russians. Where are they going to get their extras from? Eastern Europe. The invitation is, hey, if you can speak Russian, in other words, you probably came from a Russian origin, and you're in the age of 18 to 30, and you speak Russian, you can join the Russian army now and we'll pay you. Oh, you live in Lithuania or Latvia? Doesn't matter. So in other words, they're stimulating provocation within those countries. What happened in eastern Ukraine? Rebels stood up, didn't they, and fought the Ukrainians at the start. They were Ukrainians, but they probably spoke Russian too. They're saying do the same right across Eastern Europe. And so, at the expense of former Soviet republics, well, these young people are being enlisted. And so they're poaching, so to speak, on these countries, trying to get those people to say to themselves, oh, I could get paid, it's not much, but you get paid. Or alternatively, if Russia occupies, I'm on the right side. That's the way they might think. And so there we are, we can see things are moving, and it's terrifying people. Let's look at Sweden for a minute. Over the last 2 weeks, Sweden's noticed something like a periscope going through some of their waters. 3 times 2 weeks ago, 3 objects 2 weeks ago, and 1 object last week. So, remember they shrunk their navy by about 60%. Oh, it says it here, sorry. Take Sweden. The army's reduced by 90%, the navy scaled back by 80%, the air force by 70%. Are they prepared? No. So they sent one of their modern ships out and said, tell us what that sub is down there. They couldn't tell. They didn't know where it came from. They didn't have the equipment on board. So last week, the Swedes spoke to the British. The British flew a plane over. Said, yeah, there it is, there it is. They are Russian ones. They had the equipment on board. In other words, they haven't, it looks pretty modern, but it isn't that modern. It isn't up to date with what's going on. They're ill-equipped to go to war. Ill-equipped to force Russia out. But what about America? What about NATO? NATO to deploy small units in 6 Eastern European nations. Small units in 6 of those countries. There they are. A lot of good that will be. But now, let's go aside from that for a minute. Problems are rising in another way. Problems with the Muslims. Paris terror attacks. 2 million rally as Europe braces for a new terror. Here we can see in Paris huge numbers of those terrorist activities. We're not going into that. We don't want to. But look what they've done. These people have rallied, and across France, 3.7 million rallied to say to the Muslims, back it off, stop it. Not doing a lot of good. And so on the streets of Paris and various different countries across cities in France, they've got soldiers, over 10,000 soldiers. And they're doing the same in Belgium and other places where terrorism is taking place. What's the situation? French armies, oh, it's quite big, but it's completely overstretched. Soldiers are deployed in Africa, and we cannot permanently have 10,000 soldiers on the streets like there are now. We need them to face Russia, but no, we need them to look after at home. So no matter which way you look at it, they're in trouble. They haven't kept upmarket with the problems, with the weaponry needed, and they haven't got the numbers. And they've got problems at home which they can't control. And Russia's not leaving it there. Early last year, Russia deployed troops near the Polish-Lithuanian border. How could they get there? Well, here's Lithuania. See that red bit there? That's a country called Kaliningrad. On most maps it's just called Russia because they can't fit Kaliningrad in. Such a tiny little place. But when the Iron Curtain came down in 1991, that was the only part of Europe that didn't gain independence or didn't seek for it. It stayed Russian. So it's still controlled by Russia today. So what's Russia been doing? Oh, early last year they moved 3,500 troops in there. Not only did they do that, they have subsequently been moving long-range missiles, well, not that long, but long-range insofar as capable of carrying those ranges nuclear weapons into Kaliningrad. So they had the manoeuvres there last year when they had about 350 hardware, tanks, and so forth in that area. But since then, They've upgraded it to 9,000 troops. And not only that, more tanks, 3,500 I think it is. And as well as that, 55 ships off the coast of Kaliningrad. Here it is, border Poland, border Lithuania, border Latvia. You'd be pretty worried, wouldn't you, if you lived there? You'd be saying to your government, maybe, back off and be friendly with Russia. We don't really want to go to war, do we? And I believe that's where Russia is trying to aim at this stage. And so it's continuing. Russian forces exercise in the Baltic after Lithuania publishes a manual. More on that in a second. Look at the date. Russia deploys troops near Polish and Lithuanian border. The entire Baltic fleet, as well as air and land forces, will conduct drills this weekend. That's only a little while ago, a few days ago. So what are you doing? What's Lithuania going to do? Well, they've done something. Here's what they've done. They've produced a book. Russian Invasion Survival Manual, to be issued, and it should be coming out in the next few days, to citizens in the EU, but first of all to Lithuania. A book of 98 pages of what to do when Russia takes over. And what are they telling them to do? They're saying now, buy food, you'll need it, and hide it. Buy your medicine, get a couple of repeats and put it away if you need it. It's pretty frightening. In that book it shows them routes they can drive to get into another country if Russia occupies, ship routes that they can get through to get out, if they can do it. And then finally they say, well, if you can't, gunshots outside your house, windows are not outside your window, it's not the end of the world, be calm. And telling them what to do. And it appears like that book is not going to just stay there for Lithuania, who produced it, but it seems from this article that it'll go to the EU. So there we can see the situation. Russia is moving in a terrifying manner. And most of those things, I've been highlighting the dates, showing you that they've been moving in the last couple of weeks. Now, come aside to another point for a minute. Europe is in financial troubles. This man, you might have heard of him before, Professor Rubino. He's the Professor of Economics in the New York University. But in 2008 he predicted the collapse and he became called Dr. Doom. He's ultra famous for his accuracy. And he's talking about Europe facing deflation, unemployment on average there, in Spain 25%, youth unemployment 50%. He's saying, look, Europe's in a huge mess. It's facing economic depression. So they're ill prepared. They haven't really got the means to go to war, to defend themselves. They're in a mess within because of their economic situation. So the leaders are getting the point. And this comes from a prominent paper, the Washington Post. And it reports, it's a lot longer article, I've traced it as best I could. Hungarian Prime Minister said, Putin is a political model to emulate. They're saying placatory things about Russia and about the Russian leadership. Slovakia says much the same. NATO troops, he said, in our country, just like the Soviets. Ah, so the Soviets are just like Americans, not much different. Nice friendly guys. Czech Republic, similar comparison. Serbia invited Putin to the Red Army's liberation of Belgrade. Poland was concerned about its isolation and such like. So a big chunk of NATO alliance has quietly begun to lean towards Moscow, calming Putin down, saying nice things about him, to get things ready in case they get occupied. I think we can understand why they're doing it. Shocking though it may be. But it's even more dramatic than that. An election took place only a few days ago. Greece. Germans in shock as new Greek Prime Minister starts with a bang. What did he do? He first of all visited the Russians. It wasn't about the EU, the Russians. And he got a letter from Mr. Putin congratulating him. And he says, well, after all, we're the same religion. We're very muchly the same. So they've raised questions about whether the bloc's fragile consensus towards Moscow can hold. So they're saying, look, we're starting to break up. We're not really opposing Russia as we should be. Let's move on with Greece for a minute. Russia links loom large as Greece seeks debt relief. Athens' resistance on the new EU sanctions. They don't want EU, they're looking to Russia. And the new Greek government didn't agree with an EU leadership's resolution blaming Russia for the latest escalation in Ukraine. No, they're not at fault doing Ukraine. That's what the new leadership in Greece is saying. They're not at fault. For sanctions against Moscow, the EU needs 100% vote. That's the terms. 28 countries, they've got to have 28 agreeing. And this man, he agreed for the first time. But they don't think he will continue. So its opposition to Russia will break down the minute he gets serious. But it's not just there, it's spreading like wildfire. Here's Spain. What's happening there? Europe shakes as Greece spreads red spring, communist thinking. The newly elected leftist Prime Minister of Greece will be setting off to Cyprus, Italy and France. And what's he expect? He will hold talks with the Italian leader, his counterpart, the French president, and he's trying to say, let's not go the way the EU goes. So things are moving dramatically. Dramatically. What they are saying that his effect could collapse the economic structure of the EU. Only said that, I think, today. And it might have been the Australian that had it in it. All right? So things are moving dramatically. Hungarians protest against the premiers dealing with Putin. There's the Premier of Hungary, but he's not really friendly with her. He's linked with Russia. His name is Orbán. Orbán's dealing with Moscow. Includes an agreement with Russia to build new Hungarian nuclear power and a loan of billions of dollars or euro. So look at Europe. It's going exactly the way we would expect. It's starting to get fractious. It's getting terrified. It's beginning to break up in the face of all of this pressure. And they're preparing for Russian occupation. But, brethren and sisters, the Son of Man shall set his face towards... Son of Man, set your face towards Gog, of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshach and Tubal. And look what it says, a proud and exalted leader. Same in Ezekiel, Daniel chapter 8. By treachery and craft, deceit, he'll destroy many. And that is his aim. They are a proud man, always going around showing his chest and his might and his strength. And Western journalism says his aim is to establish the Third Holy Roman Empire. Exactly what we would expect from Scripture. And what's he doing now? Sydney Morning Herald, Putin's Russia will become a besieged fortress as it moves towards a dictatorship. That's exactly what it's doing. Putin's regime is on the verge of transition from mild authoritarianism to outright dictatorship. And look at the date this year. Crack down on all signs of popular dissent are taking place. He's got men on the street moving around. He's arming them. They're not soldiers, they're in mufti, so to speak. And their aim is, you step out of line and they will act. And so, for the time being, he's quite popular. But he's preparing in case it doesn't happen. And of course he's aiming to get control of Europe by cunning trickery. I did this once before with you, I think, but there's the 11th humanitarian aid moving in. Remember, Troy fell, the Trojan horse, when they put this horse outside the walls. And the army retreated. They had soldiers inside. They didn't know. They pulled it inside the building, and overnight, or inside the city overnight, these fellas came out and took control of the city of Troy. Opened the gates, next thing it fell. And the papers are saying the same again. They've even got Mr. Putin sitting on the horse as if he's going to ride it to the gates to show his treachery. And things are moving. Now it's expanded dramatically from what I showed you before. It's moving right in, and the fighting is going on right through these areas. Peace talks aimed at halting rising bloodshed in the eastern Ukraine have ended in failure. Date? February the 1st, a few days ago. Going nowhere. And of course, I will put hooks, I will turn thee back, and put hooks in thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, says Yahweh. What's causing her to move? Well, her economy collapsing. You know, somebody phoned me up, and I can't confirm these figures, but they said, look, they've got an article that shows how much Russia is going into debt every month. And then they were looking at the reserves Russia had. Now, I don't know if this all works. I'm not an expert in it. But when you divide the two in, their economy collapses by December this year. So you can see things are pretty grim. The price of oil is collapsing. 73% of its revenue came from oil this time last year. Not anymore. Oil's gone from about $1.10 a barrel to now down under $40 a barrel. Russia's economy's on the rocks. It's on the verge of recession. What's she going to do? What's she aiming to do? Russia's economy, the end of the line. For more than a decade, oil income and consumer spending have driven the economy. Not anymore. The Economist, the leading newspaper on finance. How long before the Russian economy collapses? It could get a lot worse, a lot sooner. And so they show to us it's moving swiftly towards a collapse situation. Well, is it going to cause them to back off? Brother Thomas didn't think so. Let the Russian treasury be as empty as it's said to be, and its expenditure exceeding its revenue by double the alleged deficit. Is it spending twice as much as what it says? He said it doesn't matter. It will only operate as a pressure from within, causing the autocrat, Mr. Putin at this stage, to enter into the countries and overflow and pass over. Why? To enrich himself with spoil. To go in and loot. To steal and rob from those countries. To remedy his economy. And the first country, Germany. And Germany, of course, as we know, has just in the recent time been going down faster than most in Europe. Its economy is shrinking. Now, these are old figures, but last year, but they still stand. Her economy is in real difficulty because her biggest trading partner is Russia. Biggest trading partner is Russia. So her general GDP has gone negative. Her exports gone negative. Her unemployment exploded. And then businessmen came to Mrs. Merkel and said, you keep doing this and this is what will happen. Gave her the figures. And it happened. Now there's 300,000, almost overnight, unemployed in Germany. Above what was already unemployed. And the companies, they're the biggest companies. These companies have invested over 1,000 billion in Russia. And they're liable to lose the lot if they continue to be angry with Russia and oppose it. How long can Germany continue what she's doing? Can't be long. Things are looking pretty critically there for her. And what about France? Well, we've got to be different here because the Hebrew, we won't go into this, but Brother Thomas commenting on it says France will send her conquered and crestfallen troops to do battle for the autocrat against Britain. So he expects France not to capitulate. And indeed, every indication is that that's the way she's moving. So she's going to be there, Gomer and all her bands. But look, France has been building aircraft carriers and ships for Russia. And as things have gone bad, this one got sent into the water. 440 sailors came down to take it away and pay the money. France said, no way. Not until you're back out of Ukraine. Not until you're back out. Now they've finished another ship. Another one's completed. But they're not going to supply it to Russia. So she will anger Russia, no doubt. And it looks like in the end, remember what Brother Thomas says, it looks like in the end she might have to have a bit harder treatment than some of the others. Well, here's a key word. The key word in Ezekiel 38 is the word company. Company, company, company. And that is the verb from which the word company comes from. Hebrew word kahal. And what does it talk about? The religious assembly. The religious affiliation with the Gogin Confederacy. There is a religious backing behind it. And first of all, Putin, very religious. There's his co-leader, Mr. Kirill, the leader of the Russian Orthodox Church. The communists closed down churches right across Russia. Putin came into power and reversed that. 25,000 churches have been restored. 9 a month, 3 a day at one point. Amazing. Why? Because he wants the support of religion. Putin urges Russians to return to the values of religion. But also he's gone down and he's met with the papacy. And that alliance, I believe, will come to the fore when Russia takes control of Turkey. And that's not far away. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Putin, there he is, met the Pope Francis in a state visit, warming relationships between the Catholics and the Russian Orthodox. This will be the mother church, won't it? The mother of harlots. And the Orthodox will be a daughter church. But they will come and unite and will form an evil thought. And they will come against Israel. What's that evil thought? To destroy the Jews. And indeed, during the Gaza war, there was huge protests in Europe. Huge protests against Israel. It was so serious, brethren and sisters, it was so serious, a scale not seen since Hitler. They pursued Jews in the streets of Berlin as in 1938. 8 synagogues one night was attacked, put on fire. They're saved by the fire brigade, but the next Sabbath they needed 1,000 Jews to support the Jews coming, 1,000 soldiers to help the Jews come home in Berlin and in Paris safely. Really serious. But the consequences we know has been great. 26,000 new immigrants into Israel this last year. The highest figure for the last 10 years. 32% increase over any of those previous years. Out of Ukraine, as you can expect, up by 190%. Out of France, up by 206%. They can see the trouble coming. They know it. USA, just to give you a figure, 8%. And I don't know what the British increase was. Well, it looks like it might have shrunk a little, such a small figure, but there we go. Huge numbers came in. And next year, or this year, sorry, they expect France to increase by another 100% to at least 14,000. Mr. Netanyahu went over and he invited the Jews to return to Israel. He said, you're safer there, come there. But now, Daniel 11 says, once it gets control of Europe, and I think it's in that order, but it may not be, brethren and sisters. It may not be. The Bible magazine at the moment is coming out with quite a bit of evidence seeming to indicate that Russia is ready to do this, move on Turkey. The king of the north shall come against him, Turkey. Won't he? We know that. The king of the south pushed against him during World War I and pushed him back to Istanbul and to Turkey. That happened World War I. Now the king of the north shall come against him, Turkey, from the north, like a whirlwind with chariots, with horsemen and many ships. So what do we expect? Russia is already, Turkey already threatens closing the Bosporus and on Russian ships. Many ships up here in Crimea. Crimea is worthless. And they can't get their ships out of here. There it is, the Bosporus. Narrow. They can easily put guns across here. Could easily close that waterway. And the Prime Minister of Turkey said to Putin a wee while ago now, when they took Crimea, he said in Crimea there is ethnic Turks called Tatars. If you persecute them as you did last time you controlled Crimea, we'll close the Bosporus on you. There has been indication that Russia has been doing that already. But nothing has come from this chap at this stage. So what's going to happen? We know Russia must take Turkey, and this has been a dream they've had for a long time. There's the symbol of Turkey. There's the symbol of Turkey. There's the symbol of Turkey. The cross over this Muslim symbol. We will triumph over Turkey. We will triumph over Istanbul is a statement of many of the churches in Moscow and right across Russia. See the point? And so we're seeing newspapers coming out. Eurasian Daily Monitor says, Russian push to the south, net assessment of geopolitical developments in the Black Sea region since the start of 2014. And what do they say? They have set the stage for a new Russian drive south, all directly threatening Turkey. As I said, the Bible magazine, the last one, has got lots of information in Brother Don Pearce's article on the move toward Turkey. I think Brother Thomas seems to suggest that Russia will first take Eastern Europe, then Turkey, but it doesn't have to. And so, only a few days ago, something strange took place. Mr. Erdogan and Putin have not been getting on. They've had phone calls together when they've been rowing over the phone. They've not been happy. But then Mr. Putin came along and he said, we're not going to build a pipeline through here, the southern pipeline, the southern stream pipeline, through the Black Sea into Romania, which we were proposing to do to bypass Ukraine. We will put a pipeline through here, part of it's already built, through Turkey. And Turkey shot down some time ago a Russian plane, missiles, has done all sorts of things anti-Russian. What's Mr. Putin got in mind? Why is it safe to put a pipeline through here into Greece and Turkey? And he's going ahead with it. My belief is he knows what we know, but not for the same reason. We know Russia will take Turkey, don't we? And he knows that probably before the pipeline's complete, he's got control of Turkey. He's got his timetable worked out. And so things are moving around Turkey. The back end of Turkey is Georgia. Remember, they've got control of those two states. Vladimir signed a strategic state partnership agreement with the breakaway state, moving money in there and soldiers and equipment. And they told the rest of Georgia, don't worry, that equipment's aimed at Turkey. Turkey. So what do we expect? Brother Thomas in Eureka said this, we, that's us brethren and sisters, don't have to wait the advance of the Russian goad against Constantinople. His expectation is that Christ is here before them. So look, let's just pause for a second, brethren and sisters. Look at the state of Europe. It may be that Russia's going to move in, get control of Europe first, and then move on Turkey. We aren't sure. There's a lot of evidence at the moment that Turkey is coming under threat too. And any minute one or the other could happen. Brother Thomas's words aren't inspired words, but he's been so accurate. How long have we got? Think of this year, 2015. Next year, 2016, 49 years from the Six-Day War. 70 years from the end of the Second World War. A generation, the full generation. How long have we got? We don't know. We don't know. But one thing's for sure, things are moving very dramatically, and we should be very serious about the things of the truth, brothers and sisters. We must all look at ourselves and say, how are we going? And so, let's now move on for a second. Let's look at the nations that oppose Russia. The merchants of Tarshish. Britain. Britain was very upset when this man, we saw him before, Mr. Juncker, that Jesuit, took control of and was dreaming to federalise Europe. And when that happened, Mr. Cameron went over and he really strongly said, this man is a scoundrel, he's a cheat, we do not want him. And the vote went through. 26-2. 26 for this chappie and 2 for what Mr. Cameron wanted. One other country supported him. And so Britain's ready to leave, it seems. And now there's elections just around the corner. I believe it's about 97 days, almost exactly, to that event, May the 7th. Here's the parties. Look at the size of the parties that rule Britain. Not much different, really, between them. What's the pivotal thing? Well, of course, these two are, of course, in alliance, and that's ruling the country. But where's it likely to go? There's a new party coming up. It's led by this man. Anybody know him? I bet you've seen pictures of him. He's a man who runs a party called the UKIP party, and it doesn't seem to have anything but one idea: get out of Europe. And it's exceedingly popular. Exceedingly popular. They've had 2 by-elections in Britain. There we are in those 2 places recently. And guess who won them? This new party. It looks like the party that's going to rule Britain is going to have to be in alliance with him. And he's got one issue: get out of Europe. Get out of Europe. So it does look very, very likely political moves will take place in the very near future. Now, Cameron's speech. Is Britain supporting Israel? Before the Gaza war, he flew over there and said, our links with you are unbreakable. Now, time's really gone, so let's move on quickly. What about the Commonwealth countries? The merchants of Tarshish with all the lions thereof. Commonwealth countries. Let's have a think of a few of them. What's this man? The leader of Spain, Canada, Prime Minister, Mr. Harper, great friend of Israel. My word, and they know it. I got it all laid out for him. The red carpet. They knew what he would say. The wings were full of people listening to his wonderful speech of pro-Israeli words when he visited there last year. And of course, you know this man, I don't know how long he's going to last. But anyhow, his election speech, he said, we are firmly committed to restoring Australian-Israeli friendship. And that has indeed happened. And the biggest election, probably victory ever seen in the world as far as numbers were concerned, was with the victory of India. There's the leader of India, Mr. Modi. And Mr. Modi was approached with the close of the election. They said, look, we're really behind China. We've got to fix it up. How can we get the economy of India catching up with China? He said, look, there'll be no troubles, no troubles. They said, what are you going to do? He says, I'll invite the Jews over to give us guidance on how to run this country. You know, the industry. They're very good at it. How true. How true. So the paper then came out. India's next Prime Minister touted as Israel's best friend in Southeast Asia. There it is. And he's very much friendly with this man. Prime Minister of Israel. The India-Israeli defence relationship, Netanyahu says, the sky's the limit. We'll give them every help they want. We'll be united together. So we see Commonwealth countries standing together. Well, now let's bring to the last point. Beat your swords, your ploughshares into swords, and your pruning hooks into spears. The world has got to then arm. And the papers are saying arming, but who's doing it? Oh yes, those countries in Europe are trying frantically to buy weapons, bring soldiers home, but it's too late. But somebody else is moving, using what money they've got within the country, not foreign reserves. They're talking about Russia. Increased annual spending on nuclear weapons by 50%. Budget provides for a 60% increase in national spending next year. And here we see military intelligence last year about Russia. About Russia. They know which way things are going to move. If they can intimidate the rest of the world, they'll get their way. So you can see, brothers and sisters, things are moving dramatically. Time is super short. Well, let's close by going to the words we started with. But at the times and seasons, brethren, you have no need that I write unto you. For yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord cometh as a thief in the night. You go outside our walls and go and talk to other people about what's going on worldwide, they won't hardly know about it. It's going to come like a sudden jolt. It's going to be like a thief. You know, when a thief robs a house, they don't phone up and say, we're coming, without warning. But look at what we're seeing. We don't know if it's going to come right now, but by gum, it looks it. Remember, like the birth pangs of a mother with a child, and it's come on and off, on and off, on and off, hasn't it? And look at it now. We've got to ask ourselves, is this the final stage? And what are they saying? They've been saying peace and safety. Look how Europe's defended itself over the last 25 years. The weapons it's accumulated. Backed by, take Sweden, by 70%, 80% and such like. They've been deceived. Let us not be deceived, brethren and sisters. Because when they feel that, then sudden destruction cometh upon them. And it looks like over the last month we're getting the signs of it on the way. But brethren and sisters, let us go on. Let us not sleep as do others, but let us watch and be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love and the hope of salvation. Brothers and sisters, think about it. The time appears to be very short. It fits exactly what we've thought about. It's what brethren have been saying for years and years. Brother Thomas, Robert Roberts, here's the collier. We're seeing it moving. And the signs seem to be fitting it. And the times seem to be matching it. We can't be certain, but it looks highly like it. So therefore, what does it mean? Well, what it is we should not go to sleep on this information. If I'm wrong, so what? But if I'm right, my goodness, what a wonderful thing if we are people who watch. Watching not necessarily only outside, but watching ourselves, seeing how we're walking. And we're sober about these matters, serious. Putting on the qualities that Christ wants of us. Faith, hope and love. Brethren and sisters, the time's almost here. We need to be ready. We need to be prepared. And indeed, the day is almost here. Let us pray that it might be here, brethren and sisters. I'm sure each and every one of you would love it. I would love it. But therefore, let us be people who are serious about our prayers, serious about our reading of the Bible, our study of God's Word, and our walk in the truth. Thank you. Well, brethren and sisters and young people, it is indeed a pleasure to be here with so many friendly faces again, to come to around Yahweh's Word and to look at what we can see on the world scene. You know, since we were here 1 week ago, we've seen Mrs. Merkel and Mr. Hollande, in other words, Magog and Gomer, go off to see Mr. Putin, Rosh, Meshach and Tubal. And what they're doing is trying to placate the situation in Ukraine. That's the way they view it. And then Putin, then Obama became involved. He says, we will give destructive weapons to Ukraine. That's the only answer. They said, no, 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 and backed off. And so we can see the situation looming where all of Europe will come under ultimately the control of Russia. You can't deal with Russia in the weak way we're seeing they're dealing with at the moment. And so things are moving. But that's not our subject tonight. Our subject, of course, is the area of Israel. So here's the reading that we've just looked at, brethren and sisters. And what we're seeing, of course, is that Jerusalem will be like protected as it was of old. Remember Moses, when he went down to Egypt, there was Israel like a burning bush, but it was not harmed. It came under pressure for all those around it, but it was not destroyed. That's Israel today too. That's Israel today. Because after all, they are the apple of Yahweh's eye. And remember what we just read here for a moment in Zechariah chapter 2. He says to us there that what he will do, verse 2, then said I, whither goest thou? And he said unto me, to measure Jerusalem, to see what is the breadth thereof and what is the length thereof. And he says, I'm measuring, really, the idea is the time until which judgment will come upon it, and finally the establishment of the Lord Jesus Christ and his kingdom. And we're looking forward to that time, aren't we? But let's remember, here's the Spirit of God. Let's retain that in our heart. Here's God's attitude to the Jewish people. Beloved, loved, his holy people, his chosen people, his peculiar treasure. the apple of his eye. Yahweh loves that, people. Just incidentally, there's a little family. We went to Israel this year, or last year actually, and they followed us through Hezekiah's tunnel. Came out the other side. And there they are, they took those children with them through there. And it was lovely to have a little chat with them afterwards. But let's remember the overriding principle. Let us love and respect the Jewish people, knowing that they are God's peculiar treasure. Our spirit should be God's spirit, the spirit God has toward them. Now, this year has been quite pivotal. It is 70 years from almost the close of the Second World War. 70 years since Auschwitz was liberated. 6 million died. And now, in Israel, they're returning. And the return number of actual Jews is 6 million in the land. It's almost as if the days are balanced. 70 years, a generation's passed, and here we are. It's as if that Holocaust number is now in the land, and they're growing. The numbers are accumulating. This last year was the biggest figures for 10 years of return. And where are they coming from? They're coming from Ukraine, from the north. From the north, as we read in our readings. And they're coming from France, USA and the UK. And what's driving them? Anti-Semitism. So they're coming back joyously into the land of Israel. And so the biggest population in the world today of Jewish people is in the land. Here's the population that is now in USA, and here's the population now of Jews, not Arabs, Jews in the land. So it's interesting. We're at a very, it seems, pivotal point. And how long have we got to wait? Well, we know, don't we, that the Jubilees seem to have worked. Remember that quote in Leviticus chapter 25 where it speaks of 49 years, 7 months, 10 days as the period from one Jubilee to another. God promises, and if it was sold for some reason, it's returned to that family at the end of that Jubilee, isn't it? Now, that's a bit of an oversimplification, but we haven't time to look at it in detail. So it's basically a 49-year period, isn't it? If you use it quite exactly, from the time of Eureka through to November the 2nd, 1917, when the Jews were promised the land, as was taught by Brother Thomas, which came from the Scriptures very clearly, we come to that date that we know so well. Add another 49 years, and you come to the Six-Day War. Almost exactly to the day. So what's going to happen now, brethren and sisters, if we add another 49 to it? I don't know. But it looks very, very critical, doesn't it? How long have we got? Next year, or maybe the year after, it'll be the end of that Jubilee, another Jubilee, and we're right at the edge of it. And what will it bring? Well, we can't be sure. We hope it brings Christ's return. Brother Thomas had these comments to make. Now, this is not so easy to read. I'll read it through with you. The return of security and prosperity to the tenth of the land, so he says the Jews dwelling in peace, must either precede the development of the one Yahweh man, that's us, being developed at Sinai through judgment. Peace must come just before Christ's return, in other words, or be concurrent with the operations in the recesses of Teman, Sinai. Or it may be in progress both then and before. So, brethren and sisters, what is he saying? Peace in the land comes just prior to Christ's return. You remember it says that in Ezekiel 38, that they're dwelling confidently in peace. Well, let's have a look at what's going on in the land at the moment and see what we see. All right, so an overriding comment was made, and it's a year or so back, that the winners, the ones who are benefiting from the Arab Spring, is Jews. The upheaval of the last 3 years, he says, have left the Jewish state historic enemies universally weakened, while Israel goes from strength to strength. And again, Israel may well emerge as the only real winner of the Arab Spring. So Libya, Ethiopia, all of these countries, Egypt, carving themselves up in chaos. Look at Syria now. But what about Israel? The only real winner, it seems, as the Arabs are carving each other up in the troubles that are going on. So let's have a look at, come back to the last year, the Gaza War. During that Gaza War, Israel had allies in the Arab world. Who were they? Jordan, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates has effectively lined up with Israel in opposition to Gaza. They could see what Israel was standing for and lined up with her and supported her. But no, not the only ones. The Christians are too. Christian Arabs. Here we are, man from up in the area of Nazareth. And he's encouraging in his congregation the the Christian Arabs to join the Jewish army, the young ones. You young teenagers, he's saying, you get in the army, because if the Arabs take over, the Muslims Arabs take over Israel, they'll eliminate us. So the number of Arabs joining the Israeli army jumped by 300%. 300%. Not just Christian Arabs, but also the Druze. Because they can see what's going on outside the borders of Israel. The only safe place is in Israel. Israel can't fall if they're going to survive. So they're joining up with Israel and supporting it. And Israel, of course, has got to dwell confidently. Think of the Gaza War. What did she do? She put these on the borders of the Gaza War and was able to bring down every missile. Incredible technology. But she's developed more than that since then and presented at the Singapore Air Show a laser device to bring down missiles that come from outer space, intercontinental ballistic missiles coming in. They come in at boggling speeds, but a laser can hit it and burn it out before it comes in. So Israel is looking very, very confident in many of the ways in which it's going, but it's still worried about the ISIS. They're fearfully worried that the ISIS might come into the West Bank. If they control the West Bank, they wouldn't have enough missile defence systems to control the whole of the border of the West Bank. They could do Gaza, but not the West Bank. It's too big. So Netanyahu said, we've got to go into the West Bank and stay there for a very long time. We're not going to back out. We're going to stay there and maintain a long-term military presence in the West Bank, lest the ISIS get into there. And so they are moving. Israel appropriates West Bank land for possible settlement use. 400 homes here, 400 over here, taking up farming land. And they're trying to carve up the West Bank somewhat so they can get it into enclaves that are easier to protect and stop terrorists getting into there and taking control of that area. It's quite frightening to see what's going on there. And so, brethren and sisters, things are moving dramatically. See, 400 hectares taken over. And just only over the last few days, they've said that they're going to destroy a number of the homes in the West Bank that were illegally built, funded by the EU. Came up only on the web over the last day or two. 400 homes illegally built in parts of the West Bank. They're going to destroy them to make sure Israel can maintain its control of that West Bank. What about terrorism? There is a bit in Israel, but it's been reduced dramatically at the moment. Dramatically. Netanyahu's coming out with very firm policies. And his policy is, if a young man, and it's usually the young people, teenager, 20-year-olds, enacts a terrorist act in Israel, they will go back into the West Bank and their home will be bulldozed. So the parents know they've got to keep their children under control and they can't go in to Israel and start blowing people up. You know, it's a real advantage to the Palestinians to have their child do that. If they die in it, they are funded by the terrorist groups like the Hamas, or they were, up to $1 million each. Lose a kid? Well, you do well. So Israel is saying there's a consequence, and it's beginning to work. Now let's go and look at some of the neighbours, and we'll come back to Israel in a minute. What about Egypt? Helping Israel. We said that before. And we would expect that, won't we? Because we remember when the king of the north comes in, he attacks Egypt. Egypt's not going to be with Russia in the end. And things have been changing in Egypt. Mubarak, he was relatively helpful to Israel. He's gone. Another man, Morsi, took over. He ran a religious group that was affiliated with the Hamas, we know as terrorists. He's gone now. And now this man, an army man, is back in power. Mubarak was an army man. And so here we've got General al-Sisi, and he's back in power. And so much the same as in Mubarak's day, but now much more pro-Israel, the rulership has changed. So what's happening? Cairo fights Islamic militants in Sinai. The Egyptians send many of their soldiers into the Gaza Strip, into the Sinaitic Peninsula. And they're losing men. You'll hear of, they've been hit. A busload of soldiers went by and 30 were killed. Another group of 20 died only a few days ago. Huge numbers of Egyptian soldiers are losing their life in Sinai because it's full of terrorists. Sometimes Bedouin groups, trained by the terrorists. Sometimes people from the Gaza Strip, trained by the terrorists. And lots of people have been killed, says this magazine, or Reuters, sorry, says. And they're spreading across the north of Sinai. According to one militant, about 1,000 have been killed. Egyptian soldiers. Egypt says we can't keep this up. It's just going too far. And the major problem is they're getting weaponry coming in from Gaza. That's the way it used to be. So there's Gaza. We remember here's Israel. There we are, better map there. There's the Gaza Strip. And here's the boundary cut off from Israel. Israel's maintaining its border well. But this is open in a sense. Along here, people have built a lot of homes. And under the homes are tunnels coming up. And terrorists are bringing equipment in from the Sinaitic, across Sinai, from ships, and taking them across those tunnels into Gaza. Gaza's getting equipped. But now it's going the other way. The Egyptians have cut off access to Gaza, and now they're bringing the weapons out here and attacking Egypt. So Egypt's acted. Over 1,200 smuggling tunnels have been destroyed, they claim. Seems hard to believe, doesn't it? These are figures I've just read from the papers. Seems stunning. And so here it is. Most of the tunnels have been destroyed. Every now and again they find a few more. But up until now, through those tunnels have been moved equipment and stuff and food and all sorts for the Gaza Strip, and the Hamas taxed it. And we're making 230 million a month with equipment coming in. Not anymore. Not anymore. Egypt has had enough. They've lost too many men. They've gone along that Gaza Strip. Maybe we'll go back for a minute. They've gone along here, and they've gone to the homes in that area just only in the last couple of weeks, and they said, we've had enough. Up to 1 kilometre away from that wall, that boundary, leave your homes and we'll pay for your house. If you don't leave, you'll lose it. And in came the bulldozers, and they levered the whole area. And that's what we're seeing here. Here's 60 of the tunnels destroyed and some of the homes being bulldozed and destroyed. Okay, clearing more than 800 homes destroyed, displacing more than 1,100, but they can't do anything else. They've got to get rid of them. It's gone crazy. And now Egypt's also had enough with the Hamas. They've gone on to the international people who've said the Hamas are good guys and said, no, they're not. They're a terrorist organisation. Look at the date. It's a terrorist organisation, says Egypt, and acknowledge it. And label them very clearly that they are a real problem. A real problem. And so we can see things are moving. What's it like in Gaza now? Well, you can't get anything in and out. Israel's controlling the waters and its borders, and Egypt controlling the southern border. So if you work for the Hamas, you've been paid 3 times for 3 weeks' work since the Gaza war. That's 6 months. Hamas have received only 3 partial salary payments in 18 months. They couldn't do anything. They're not getting the money that they get from taxing those goods coming in. And they're trying to persuade Egypt to open the border up. And Egypt did a week or 2 ago, opened it up for a little while, and they lost more men. They said, that's it, finite. We'll keep it closed. See how you go. Some of the kids in Egypt, in Gaza just a little while ago, just before Christmas, said to their parents, apparently it was widely reported, why don't we become Christians? If we go Christians, the Jews let us cross out of Gaza and go across to Bethlehem for Christmas. If we do that, at least we can get out and in for a little while. It's horrible here. My word, it would be. It would be. But at least it's bringing peace for Israel somewhat. Now let's move on to Jordan. Of course, we've all heard about Jordan of recent time, but let's recap it. We remember, don't we, that Jordan will be pro-Western. When Russia enters into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, these escape out of his hand, because they're not supporting Russia. Edom, Moab and the chief of Ammon, which is the territory today of Jordan. All right? Now, Jordan has always been very pro-Western. The king, King Hussein, his mother was born in Britain. His grandmother was born in Britain. So he's 3/4 British, isn't he? And they've been very pro-British, and the British and the Americans have helped. Go back quite a way. Look at the date there. Large amounts of American equipment was sent there when they pulled out of Iraq, brought it into Kuwait. They took it into Jordan rather than take it back to America. It was oldish stuff, but now it's in there. And large quantities of American equipment is found in Jordan. Hard to see on that map, but there we are, the little area of Jordan. So it's pro-Western and pro-Israel now. They were trying to get gas. They used to get gas a year or 2 ago from pipelines coming across the Sinai Desert from Egypt. No, not anymore. The terrorists down there, like they've been blowing up Egyptian soldiers, have been blowing up the tunnel or the pipeline. So where can you go to get gas for your power station and you can rely on it? Well, of course, Israel. So they signed a $500 million gas deal to bring it into the Hashemite Jordanian kingdom. And it's going to come from their first find, and it'll start next year. So they're bringing gas into there. So aligned exactly as we would expect with the Western powers and with Israel. Fits exactly as we would understand. And we would have understood from Brother Thomas many years ago. Now, well, just to remind ourselves, that horrible event, a poor man who was killed, who was a pilot, a Jordanian pilot who flew into that area there, and he was destroyed. And immediately that happened, America said, we can see how you feel. We will give you equipment. We will support you. We'll help you. And the people were alarmed at what took place. Now, I don't say all of them, but most of them called on the government to eradicate the Islamic State. And my goodness, they have moved. More than America, up until this point, Jordan has gone, and there's their most famous pilot. King Hussein himself apparently boarded a plane and flew in and attacked these areas up here. Over 50 attacks have been launched into that area since that happened, and it was only a little while ago. Jordan is making a major effort to be involved in the battle against the ISIS. And as well as that, you would expect it, wouldn't you? The ambassador returned to Israel. Jordan envoy to go back to Israel after recall. There were some problems on the West Bank in Israel over the Temple Mount, and the ambassador was called home. But not anymore. He's sent back to Israel, and he's down there in Tel Aviv, where the embassy is held. So we can see Jordan is fitting exactly where we would expect scripturally, isn't it? Precisely. What about Arabia referred to in the scriptures? Well, it should be a pro-Tarsian ally, isn't it? A little difficult for us yet to fully know where things are moving, because the previous leader only died a few weeks ago and this man has taken over. He was the Minister of Defence for a while, so he switched on as far as weaponry and fighting is concerned. But let's remind ourselves of the stance they took of old. So I haven't changed the picture. There's the previous leader who's just died. And they were pointing out how worried they were over the weaponry building just across the coast from there. Nuclear. Iran's trying to build nuclear weapons. So Saudi Arabia said, we can't do it, but we got the money. So they went to Pakistan and asked Pakistan for their long-range missiles, bought them, and some caps to go on the top. And it's believed they've got some nuclear weapons there too, ready for Iran if Iran gets silly. And so here's how the papers once considered. I think it's quite true today. There was the leader of Iran a little while ago. We remember him. What nukes? We don't have them. That's what they're saying now. Not true. See, sitting down with these guys works, said Obama, and he seems highly deceived, and we're seeing the same right now. We'll talk more on that in a minute. So how are they going to defend themselves? Well, this is what they're talking about. Israel said to be working with Saudi Arabia on an Iran strike plan. Come through us and hit Iran, we will be happy, because it gets those weapons destroyed. And we know you're pretty good at it, Israel. And so it seems they've been talking behind the scenes on it. And of course they have also been talking with this man, Cameron, the leader of Britain. Again, exactly the way we think. Now that's not the new leader, that's the old one, but he's only been the new one, only been there a few weeks. So it's hard for us to get enough information about him at this stage. But he is working on this area. He's working on the area of Yemen. Now where's Yemen? Well, there's the Gulf of Aden, here's the Indian Ocean. Okay, Saudi Arabia's in this area, here's the Red Sea. Right at the bottom of there, isn't it? And we know that here's Aden of old, where Britain was. Brother Thomas often speaks about Britain controlling that area there again, in the end, to control the Red Sea. But at the moment, it's been taken over by the extremists. It's been taken over by these Al-Quds who are linked with Iran. And the Houthis, another group, don't worry about the names, they're taking over this area here. And they've kicked out the Prime Minister or President, and he's had to flee the country. And so America's influence there is gone for the moment. The previous leader deferred to America. Not anymore. And so things have changed. Now these terrorist groups or these tribes are linked to Iran. It's worrying the world terribly, because still about a third of the world's, quarter of the world's oil passes through that Red Sea. They're very worried over it. And Saudi Arabia is moving on it straight away with this man. He's trying to influence those that are in this area here, that they might take back control of that area of Yemen, what we call Sheba of old, where the Queen of Sheba came from long ago. Now, let's come to this country. There's not much we can say. That's the state of Syria. Utter chaos. Israel enemy destroying itself within. Indeed, it is in a very, very difficult plight. Up to the north, the ISIS crowd are taking over. Down to the south, Damascus, and Assad is desperately trying to hold on to his control of the country. The weather changed the other day. Apparently he flew 200 attacks up into the ISIS area to hammer them. Winter had passed and there was a few clear days, and he moved again. But he's not getting control totally of that country. It's chaotic. But what about Israel? Well, Israel has already said many times, it's one of the leaders over there, the Zion Defence Minister, warned several times that we have a red line. Don't cross it. And Jordan appears, and Syria appears to be, relatively speaking, honouring that, keeping away from that. Oh yes, terrorists come in which aren't under the control of Syria. The Hezbollah people come down only a few days ago, along with the Iranian chap. and Israel attacked them. But largely speaking, they've been staying away from attacking Syria. Some years ago, Syria, here's Assad, the leader of Syria, seeks Israel to continue to allow him at least to control his homeland territory. The Alawi group up there said, just keep on our side for the moment, because the place is out of control, utterly out of control. But let's move on. Iraq. There's Iraq, and it's got ethnic groups in there, or religious groups in there. The Kurds, which are one group, and then these Sunni and Shiites are two religious departments of the Arab area. Usually these are more radical than these, but these are the ones backing the ISIS at the moment, and they are much more radical. So what do we expect? We expect Persia to be associated with Russia. Persia includes the area that was occupied by Persia of old, from Iran to the Indus, Pakistan. So Iraq to Pakistan. So let's look at Iraq for a moment. What's going on there? The Shiites and the Sunni are taking over. So what do we know about that area? Well, let's go back to Brother Thomas. It's always a good fallback position. What does Brother Thomas say? Back in 1856, on the basis of the scriptures, he said the Shiites of Persia and the Sunnis hate each other with a hatred not exceeded by the Protestant, Orangemen, and the Catholics of Ireland. Terrorists really began there, didn't it? They murdered each other and blew each other up, you know, maybe 30 years ago. He said that'll be the same. And that area, will be led to indulge in dreams of extending her frontier in the direction of Baghdad by the aid of Russia. Goodness me. Are the Shiites and Sunnis blowing each other up? Of course they are. And are they threatening Baghdad? Yes, they are. And who's coming to their help? Well, let's have a look. There's the area of ISIS controlled now. And there they are moving down there, and they're not far from Baghdad. Well, they're delightful people. When they take over, they're terrifying, to say the least. Here's a few people who were soldiers, threw the garments away so they couldn't be seen to be soldiers. When the ISIS captured them, well, we won't leave that up there. It's horrible to think about. That's the nature of them. And so they've expanded through this area here. They've threatened Saudi. They've threatened Jordan. When they threatened Saudi a few months ago, Saudi brought up 30,000 troops to the borders of there, and they backed down. They threatened Jordan here, and Jordan brought forward proof that the Western forces would help them, and Israel. And they backed down. And they are continuing to move in this area, trying to take control of it. But they've got a problem. Saudi has a weapon: oil price. If we can plunge the oil price, we can bankrupt Iran, and we can bankrupt ISIS. And, oh yes, Russia as well as that. But the main area I'm sure they're thinking about was Iran and the ISIS crowd. So, Iran, they brought the price of oil down. They've hammered the pipelines up here, bombed them from the air. Fuel is not getting out from there easily into the Western world. They're not getting their money. So where's the ISIS going to get funded? They've got an action. This is what they did. Look at the date. ISIS forces capture Libya oil fields. So they got a terrorist group to go across near to Libya and attacked an area and took control of huge oil refineries and oil pipelines and things like that, so they can export oil again. Might not be getting as much as they used to, but they're still getting money to fund their weaponry. Incredible. But now, come back. They're threatening Baghdad, weren't they? They're just outside Baghdad. So where does Baghdad go for help? They asked the Americans to come to help. We'll send some planes over and bomb a few for you, but we won't give you weapons. They ask Iran, and Iran says, we don't trust the people in Baghdad. We won't do it. Initially, that's what they did. So then they asked Russia. Guess what? Reportedly delivering weapons to Iraq immediately. That's quite a bit back. When Baghdad was first threatened. Now, I don't know of any more, but they were flying stuff in straight away for the troops of Iraq. Now let's move on to Iran. Russian ally. A dangerous threat to the free world. That's what we would expect, isn't it? Going to be with Russia, isn't it? And there we are, the key part of Persia is Iran. And what have they been concentrating on? Developing weapons. Look at their missiles that changed as the years gone by. Iran could destroy Israel in less than 9 minutes, they boasted. When we've got our missiles ready, and now they've got ICBMs that go into orbit and can come out over America or Australia without any more fuel, just goes into orbit, and when you fire your re-entry rockets, you drop into that particular country. At that point, they could travel 3,400 kilometres and enter at 4,000 metres a second. You would never hit them on a normal gun. Lasers can hit them. And so they are developing weapons. Putin came across to the G8 meeting in Brisbane. When he came back, his first contact was Iran. And they were ready to talk to, the Americans were ready to talk to Iran about them stopping building nuclear weapons. And they were going to meet on November the 25th. Just before they got there, Russia did something. This is what Russia did. Deal calls for Russia to build 8 nuclear reactors in Iran. Pulled the plug on the meeting straight away. We'll start building 2 nuclear reactors straight away and we'll bump it up to 8, said Mr. Putin. What could the Western world do? The talks collapsed. Absolutely collapsed. It was useless. Chaotic events were going on. And so things are moving very dramatically as things go on. Now, the price of oil has dropped. It's hurting Iran. What was the first action that was taken? Well, here's one of them. They moved into Libya. They bombed in Libya. This is before the ISIS took control of quite a significant area. They went in and bombed some of the oil tanks on the coast and pushed the oil price up a little. They didn't stop there. On November the 26th, don't know if they were choosing a special day, but, you know, they closed the Persian Gulf. They had for a week the largest Iranian manoeuvres ever seen at the headwaters of the Persian Gulf. Message, America, Britain, the rest of the world, if we want, we can close this Gulf. You be careful what you do with us. We can close it. So out came their aircraft, out came their ships, and for a whole week they manoeuvred in that to prove they are in control. Brother Thomas had a comment on that. The lion power of Britain will have to, I believe, seize from Dedan, and she may command the entrances of the Persian Gulf. It's the only way. The economies of the world would cripple. And Britain acted straight away after that. Well, in fact, the date's before that, but they knew about it earlier than that. And Britain, not America, Britain, says we're going to build a base, control a base here in Bahrain. The first British overseas military Middle East military base since 1971. Why there? Well, it's obvious. They're going to have to control that. Or for a moment, if Iran wishes to, it can cripple the world. And things are moving desperately. Look at the date, January the 22nd. Look at what they've photographed. That's what they've photographed. It's a missile base, and it's one that can go into orbit. It's an intercontinental ballistic missile. You fire it up and it goes into orbit. It stays in orbit till you want it to re-enter. A direct threat to the United States as well as Israel. Come out of orbit anywhere. And what's Israel thinking about that? The role of Israel leader is to adopt the policies that protect Israel, says he. We are bothered by this. We are sincerely bothered by this. We don't want it to happen. But now, Obama is to go over there only in a few weeks and talk to them. Talk to them again. And what's the plan? We'll look at that in a second. But they are in Iran laying the framework to get exactly what they want. So, Iran's Ayatollah flags push for nuclear agreement. A deal with the West on limiting their country's nuclear capacity. Yeah, we'll sign that. So far. But somebody's upset about it. Prime Minister of Israel. We will allow Iran to arm itself with nuclear weapons, something which will endanger the existence of Israel. He says, I'm going to act against that. They're galloping towards that. It's only a little way away. It's very desperate, he says. I'll come back to that in a minute. So, what's USA going to do? USA, it looks like, according to Reuters, a very, very consequential reporter, not a crazy reporter, says USA's got a cunning trick up its mind. It's going to ask Iran to take on the ISIS. So if they're fighting each other, they'll just carve each other up. That's what they're hoping. Nobody can control either of them. So that's what they're aiming to do. They're saying we'll form a military alliance between USA and Iran in the area of Iraq, where the ISIS are. A stark lack of options has forced the USA to side with someone who they never would before, Iran. And here's what they're suggesting, according to Debka, one of the Israeli commentaries. They're saying to Iran, why don't you expand through here, eh? Take control of all that way, and you get control of the ISIS. And you get control of northern Lebanon and such like. Sounds a good idea. But Persia or Iran's got further thoughts. It would like that. To the borders of Israel. And Israel's not terribly happy about it. Here's a little picture meant to be Mr. Netanyahu. His response. Does it fit? I think it does. I think it does. I'd be feeling that same way too if I was the Prime Minister of Israel. They're very worried about him at the moment. Within a month he's going over and he's going to talk to the Congress. And they know it will be anti-Obama and pro more the right wing. America's really bothered by it, or Obama is, as to what he's going to say, but we'll see. I think it's about a month and a day before he goes over there to talk. So it'll be very, very interesting to hear what he says when he does. It'll be one of the most consequential speeches out, I should imagine. All right. Well, time's running away. Let's come closer to home, to Israel. Lebanon, a home for all the chaotic groups. There it is, bordering with Israel. Down here is the Hezbollah terrorist group, funded again by Iran, threatening Israel. And so what's Israel doing? Well, Hezbollah is spent to have at least 170,000 rockets capable of hitting Israel. But of course Israel has got the Iron Dome and now their new laser devices. How well it works, we don't know, but they seem amazingly backing off with the Hezbollah. They had an opportunity to really hammer them the other day. 2 of their soldiers got shot by the Hezbollah on the northern border of Israel. Israel flew their bombers in and attacked and then backed off, and a message came to them through USA. The Hezbollah said, look, we don't want the war to go any further. And Israel said, all right. And yet they had an opportunity to go further if they were very bothered by it. What's worrying the Hezbollah? And why is Israel quite happy about things at the moment? Well, this appears to be it. The Islamic State fighters mass on Lebanon's border and threaten to launch attacks across it. Where? To the north of Lebanon. So up in the north part of Lebanon, in coming the ISIS, and down the south, the Hezbollah are threatening Israel. Lebanon said, get your soldiers out of here and head up north and protect us. And that's what they're doing. Just mayhem, isn't it? Utter chaos. But again, the trouble in the Arab world, his hand shall be against every man's hand, Genesis 16, is certainly happening. And keeping the Arabs off the back of Israel. And you know, Lebanon really is crazy because it's got a huge potential if it only wants to. Look at this. Cyprus and Israel's oil and gas reserves have been exploited somewhat. They've been finding oil. But the area they're expecting to find huge amounts further is not being tested up at here. It's now Lebanon's turn, they're saying. And applications to exploit that oil have come from a few companies: Exxon, Chevron, Rosneft, Total, Statoil, Dutch Royal Shell, and so on. 52 companies have applied for licences there. Those huge finds in Israel, they reckon, go right up along the coast. And Lebanon could be well off. So on two sides, allow us to attack Israel, poverty-stricken, war, death, destruction. And we could leave ourselves vulnerable from the north, from the ISIS. On the other hand, if we've got a brain in our head, and I don't know if that's quite true at times, we could be well off. And so when we look at the Arab world around Israel, what are we seeing? Well, brothers and sisters, all Israel's Arab neighbours are preoccupied in civil war. Nearly all of them, one way or another. Or they're like Egypt and Jordan, re-looking at their relationship with Israel. So things are moving nicely for Israel, relatively speaking, isn't it? Well, now let's come back to Israel for a moment. Let's look at Israel's economy. Remember, we're looking at a particular quote. Ezekiel chapter 38 verse 13 says, "She'll be rich in silver and gold and cattle and goods, economically strong, a good producer of food, temptation to Russia to invade ultimately." Book came out a few years ago, got a copy at home, there it is, The Startup Nation, the story of Israel's economic miracle. Amazing stuff in it. Now you take the Jews, extremely bright. I've got a list of various different Nobel Prize winners, but let's just have a look at it. 2013, when I had last figures on it, there were 193 Jews who'd won Nobel Prizes. Now, if you extrapolate that out, the number of Nobel Prizes won by the Arabs at the same time, and increase the population of Israel from what it is, or the Jews, from what it is today to what the Arabs are, they would have won 4,135 to 4 Nobel Prizes won by the Arabs. Is that a measure of brain capacity? I don't know. But look at it, staggering. The Jews have won 22% of the world's Nobel Prizes. Their population is 0.2% of the world. Just think of it. It's just stunning. They are the startup nation, they say, the story of Israel's miracle. Israel produces more startup companies that are large, peaceful and stable nations than stable nations like Japan, China and so on. They beat everybody, hands down. Israel's got the highest density of tech startups, 2.5 times USA. Look at the size of USA, 30 times Europe, 80 times India and so on. Staggering. Now, young people, here's a little cube. Don't worry about that chap there. He's their Minister of Trade. But a company called Viber. You see, in Israel, you go in the army when you come out of high school. You go in for 4 years. And what do? They teach you to fight, but they also teach you to think fast. Because they have found that fast thinkers on the battlefield do well. And they're training them. Don't know how. But when they come out, my goodness, what they are achieving is staggering. 4 young people got together and they began to work on this company called Viber. So you can go on your web, on your handheld, and you can send a picture of yourself anywhere in the world to your friend and be on the phone to them. They sold it just a little while ago, look at the date, this time last year, for 900 million, not a bad start-up job. So there you are. I think they're only about 2 or 3 years working on it, feet up in front of a computer, having a good time, chatting away, then sell it for 900 million. And it hasn't stopped there. Now, I could multiply this many times, but let's look at what's coming up soon. This one. You got a cell phone? Okay. Do you ever get anything go wrong with you? Well, in future you won't have to worry very much about it. Your cell phone will be a sniff phone. Israel's developed it already. And you sniff into it and it will analyse it, send the information to a computer somewhere, probably in Israel, pay a little bit for it, and tell you, come back and say you're going really healthy. You might have to do a few more runs or something like that. But you know what I mean? It'll apparently be able to analyse early quite a lot of illnesses. Early interception often means the illness doesn't go anywhere and it's defeated or it's overcome by medicine. So there's the new one. The phones will come out with it probably automatically in it in future. And so, you know, you phone it up and say, you're going well today. Well, hopefully it doesn't tell us we're not going too good. But other things are coming up. They've just launched one of the biggest floats on the world scene ever. The biggest Israeli IPO, that's a float for a company, just been launched in America. Look at the date, okay? But when did it end? Its value was several $1 billion floated. And it's a company that's it's linked to Tesla, who produces this car here. And they are producing in it driverless cars. That'd be great, wouldn't it? I don't know if my grandson's terribly happy. He's looking forward to becoming a driver. He'd love to be out there driving a car, but now he'd be able to hop in the car and Dad say, fine, I take the keys, I'll turn it on for you, and it'll drive you where you want to go safely. They reckon 40,000 people will save their lives every year because of it. It will work out distances, it'll brake, it'll do everything for you so you don't get hurt. 2 years they reckon it's away. And of course it's a huge float. The valuation of the float was 7.5 billion. Everybody wanted to get into it and they knew Israel would be right on top of it. So here's a company floated in America, backed by an Israeli sources. It's obvious, isn't it? And of course Israel hasn't stopped in hunting for oil. Look at the date. Just late last year, found a new field. There it is. There's the Leviathan, there's the Tamar, and now they've got this new one. And this one is pretty well 100% owned by the Jews. So it's expanding dramatically. Not only are they doing that, they're selling arms all over the place. They've been over talking to the Indians, selling equipment to them. Israel defence equipment exports have reached $7 billion in 2012, and it continues to expand. Continues to expand. So it's booming with brilliant technology, natural resources, huge exports, and also in food. They leave us for dead. We are 280 times bigger than they are, and we've got deserts like they've got deserts, but yet they're about 20 or 30 times more productive per acre than we are. Incredible. Staggering. They are very good at it. So Israel's agriculture exports are booming. Well, brethren and sisters, as you look at Israel today, around her, a lake of fire, fighting each other, chaotic. They threaten Israel, it seems, at the moment, and then all of a sudden somebody coming in the back door, attacking another Arab country or another Arab force. And Israel seemed to be living blithely on, a burning bush that's not consumed. We did that in our readings only a little while ago, didn't we, back in Exodus chapter 3. It's now true again in some regards. The great mercy of our God is extended to that people who he loves. How long will it last? Is this the peace that Brother Thomas expects before Christ comes? Is next year something consequential, a jubilee from the state of Israel? We don't know, brethren and sisters. But let's not go to sleep spiritually. Now let's conclude with this, just a little quirky thing. The debt in USA. I went on the web only a few days ago. There's a clock going up that's ticking away all the time. And the USA's reached 18 trillion debt. Now how big's a trillion? Well, 1 trillion seconds equals 31,688 years. That's a bit of a feel how much a trillion is. So that's over 5 times as long as we've been on this earth. Man's been here since creation. Huge time. That's counting every second. Every second. So if America paid it off at $18 a second. It would take 31,688 years to pay it off. They're in a mess. If the world economy begins to break up, and they've got the international currency, so it's guaranteed not only by them but by the world, if that begins to break up, and Mr. Putin's working to do just that right now, we can see we are living on borrowed time. On borrowed time. And we're not much different here in Australia, are we? But we're dependent on the international currency as well as every other country. So, brethren and sisters, what about it? Let us not sleep as do others. Let us watch and be sober. Who do you watch first? Where do you watch first? Yes, the sign's important, but watch ourselves. How are we going with prayer, our daily readings, and our Bible classes? How are we walking in the truth? Are we sober in that which we do, or going worldly ways? Best thing, put on the breastplate of faith and love for a helmet and the hope of salvation. Time is short, brethren and sisters. I don't know how long it's going to be. You don't. But it sure looks like it could be any time. And so let us be very serious about the things that really do count. Our God, His Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, and His return from heaven. Thank you.